A few days ago, I saw an article about the altar stone at Stonehenge and thought it must be a fairly late coverage of the various papers that came out about it in 2023 and 24. But then I realized that there was actually a whole new study into the altar stone. Yes, another one. Nothing has changed with regards to its origin. It still seems that it travelled more than 700 kilometres from Scotland to Stonehenge, but the new research questions just how that happened. Let's find out more. Firstly, let's back the truck up for those of you who have missed all of the drama or need a quick summary. If you already know the story, then skip to the new research via the chapters. The story began in 2023 when a paper published in the Journal of Archaeological Science reports challenged a long-held view about Stonehenge's altar stone. The altar stone, labelled as Stone 80, is 4.9 metres long, 1 metre wide and 0.5 metres in height. It's considered to be a recumbent stone, meaning it's lying on its side, which may have been done intentionally or it could have fallen at some point in time. Unlike many of the monument's other stones, which can be traced to Wales or closer to Stonehenge, researchers found evidence suggesting that the altar stone originated elsewhere. For context, the famous blue stones have been linked to the Preseli Hills of Wales, whilst the massive sarsen stones came from much closer to Stonehenge itself. Then in August 2024, a study published in Nature proposed a Scottish origin for the altar stone. By analysing its geological characteristics, researchers traced it to the Orcadian Basin in northeastern Scotland. The Orcadian Basin encompasses both mainland northeast Scotland and the islands of Orkney, a region renowned for its Neolithic monuments. This study was huge, because it meant that the altar stone had travelled more than 700 kilometres. Because archaeologists had previously suggested long-distance connections between Orkney and Stonehenge, another study set out to investigate whether the altar stone came from the same source as the stones used in Orkney's stone circles. The results, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science reports later that year, ruled out Orkney as the stone's direct source. These figures taken from the paper show the monuments they used in the study, the stones of Stenness and the ring of Brodgar. Even so, the evidence still pointed towards an origin somewhere within the wider Orcadian Basin. Another 2024 study explored why a 6-tonne stone might have been transported more than 700 kilometres from northern Scotland to the Salisbury Plain. The authors suggested that the journey may have been part of a broader alliance or cultural collaboration between Neolithic communities in northern Scotland and those responsible for Stonehenge. They also examined the practicalities of moving such a stone, looking at the various advantages and disadvantages of overland and maritime transport routes. Now, a new paper offers a new possibility. If the altar stone did definitely originate in the Orcadian Basin, then instead of human transport, could it have been carried south by ice? The study investigates whether the stone might have arrived on or near the Salisbury Plain as a glacial erratic, transported during the late Bevins glaciation between roughly 30,000 and 15,000 years ago. Did the builders of Stonehenge simply repurpose a stone that nature had already delivered to them? This is not the first time that glaciers have been mentioned in the context of Stonehenge. It's pretty much accepted now that the blue stones of Stonehenge originated in Wales, and most archaeologists support the idea of human transportation, whether by water or by land or a combination of the two. However, Welsh geologist Dr. Brian John has long been an advocate for the glacial transport theory. This is when a huge boulder is transported and deposited far from its geological origin by a glacier. He wrote a paper in 2024 suggesting that glacial erratics may have reached the Salisbury Plain via the Irish Sea Stream during the Anglian glacial episode around 450,000 years ago. So not during the more recent last glacial maximum or late Devensian 25,000 years ago. He provides supporting evidence for this hypothesis, including the presence of other stones and boulders around Stonehenge that may also have been glacial erratics. His idea is not, it seems, widely supported by archaeologists. In the latest paper on the altar stone, a team of researchers combined two different approaches to the glacial transport theory. Firstly, they attempted to refine the stone's geological source. This is important because the precise source location affects the type of glacial transport that would have been possible. Ice sheets do not simply move in a straight line. Their flow directions change over time as glaciers expand and retreat. A stone caught within the ice may travel in several different directions over thousands of years. Secondly, they used computer models to reconstruct the movements of the British-Irish ice sheet during the last ice age. The geological work focused on tiny zircon crystals preserved within the sandstone. These crystals act like geological fingerprints because they contain information about the age and history of the rocks from which they were originally derived. By comparing the zircon populations in the altar stone with samples from across northeastern Scotland, the researchers were able to narrow down the most likely source regions. Their results suggest that the best matches are found on the Scottish mainland. In particular, the Caithness region and the Inverness Black Isle area produce zircon signatures that most closely resemble those of the altar stone. The researchers modelled ice flow between 30,000 and 15,000 years ago during the late Devensian glaciation, the last major ice age in Britain. They simulated what would happen if large sandstone blocks were picked up from different locations within the Orcadian Basin and transported by moving ice. The models showed that some source areas could indeed send large boulders southward. However, none of the simulations transported material directly to Stonehenge or even to southern England. Instead, the most promising routes carried stones southeast towards the now-submerged region of Doggerbank in the North Sea. Today, Doggerbank lies underwater, but during the Ice Age and early post-glacial period, it was part of a vast landscape called Doggerland. This area connected Britain to continental Europe and was inhabited by Mesolithic hunter-gatherers before rising sea levels eventually drowned it. According to the models, a stone originating in parts of northeastern Scotland could have been carried hundreds of kilometres by glacial ice before being deposited on Doggerbank. If this happened, the distance that humans later needed to transport the stone would have been reduced from approximately 700 kilometres to around 400 kilometres. However, there's still a problem with this idea. Doggerbank was submerged thousands of years before Stonehenge was constructed. This means that even if the altar stone had been deposited there by a glacier, it could not simply have remained in place until Neolithic builders arrived. Instead, people would have had to recover the stone from a landscape undergoing major environmental change, move it elsewhere, preserve it for generations, and eventually transport it hundreds of kilometres to Salisbury Plain. The authors therefore conclude that a purely glacial explanation is unlikely. While glaciers may have played a role in moving the stone part of the way south, they cannot account for its final arrival at Stonehenge. The study also highlights an important issue here because the geological evidence points most strongly towards source regions such as Caithness, but those areas are not ideal for southward ice transport. Other locations within the Orcadian Basin fit the glacial models better, yet they provide a weaker geological match for the stone itself. The researchers ultimately argue that the most plausible scenario is a combination of natural and human agency. Ice may have transported the altar stone part of the journey during the last ice age, but substantial movement by people would still have been required. Even under the most glacier-friendly model, Neolithic communities would have had to transport a 6-tonne stone hundreds of kilometres before incorporating it into Stonehenge. So what do you think about the glacial transport idea? Since there's a good amount of evidence that ancient groups moved the bluestones from Wales to the Salisbury Plain, I see no reason why they couldn't also have transported the altar stone from Scotland. We know that certain cultural connections existed, grooved where pottery first appeared in Orkney in the first half of the 3rd millennium BCE, before this style spread throughout Britain, including to Stonehenge. And there are clear similarities between the stone circles of Orkney and other parts of Britain. Ideas, traditions, and techniques certainly travelled. All I can say is that if they did transport the altar stone from Scotland, they likely used a similar method to how they transported the blue stones from Wales. And at the moment, we really don't know what that was. If they did utilize water, such as rivers or the sea, then we don't really have evidence for what those boats looked like either. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you next time.